My apartment's like the Sahara. Like it's probably, I'm not looking forward to the bill. I'm sure it's gonna be ridiculous.
We are live.
Okay, hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Dream Unfinished YouTube show. We are so excited that you're joining us this afternoon. This episode is going to focus on two segments, a segment that we're calling On the Record, which is a little bit about musicology and the history of music, and the Yet Unheard segment, as always, which focuses on a lesser known masterwork by an underrepresented composer. So as you can see on the screen, we are joined by someone very special. This is our new host for the YouTube show. We are thrilled to introduce to you Mr. Damian Norfleet. Damian, I'm so excited you're here. This is so fantastic.
I'm so excited to be here. That was the kindest, most generous introduction. This smile is so genuine. Thank you. That was sweet.
Oh no, you're so wonderful. So Damian is an actor, singer, talent extraordinaire, and a longtime friend of TDU. So Damian, can you just introduce yourself, your fabulous self, to the audience, to everyone involved? We're so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So I do all of those things that you just said. I guess these days we wear so many hats, but I guess the four I regularly share with people is that I'm a vocalist, I am a performance artist, I am a creator, and I am a gosh, what else? That's kind of the root of everything, and it kind of all gets summed up in that. And collaborator. I love collaborating, and I love learning from my fellow peers. I've been lucky enough to meet lots of great people, including TDU and all the incredible musicians that work here. I mean, it's just it's a great thing. But in addition to being an actor and a singer and a creator and a collaborator, there are two other things that are lesser known, I guess, about me. In addition to that, I am also a bassoonist. I was officially a professional bassoonist. I did garner a wage once upon a time. I was an associate bassoonist of a orchestra I'm pretty sure no longer exists, but I was there. And I'm also a saxophonist. I once toured the country in a musical where it was a big band musical where I served as the host / lead singer and saxophone soloist. So I am very excited for my inaugural trip with TDU and you being all things saxophone today. I am very, very, very excited about that. Almost as excited as I was in 2015 when I first met TDU. That is when my relationship first started with the organization.
Yeah.
Picture it, I was sitting in the front row of a performance space about 50 paces away from Union Square. And I'm sitting there eagerly awaiting some very familiar faces who were going to be on stage and, friends and whatnot. And the music started, and it was amazing. It was beautiful. It was all those things that I expected from this crop of musicians. But it was also life-changing. There was this feeling in the room. I don't know how to explain it. It was this kind of weird, it was charged. There was like this, I don't know. I can't even put words to it, but there was this weird feeling of community and like excitement and electricity and newness, even though it was a very good experience. And I knew from that moment I wanted to be associated in some way. And fast forward a few years, in 2019, I was lucky enough to perform on the season closer. I was the guest soloist in the 2019 season closer, which was amazing. And I did not know that would be, one of the last huge public performances for a while, right? For a while. But as fate would have it and good fortune, here I am again in the arms of TDU, sitting across from you. And I'm really, really excited about this episode. A, I'm happy to be here, but B, I'm happy that we get to explore and talk about the saxophone. I am so, so excited. And as you said before, there's going to be two sections, right? That I'm equally excited about both. The Yet Unheard piece, which we're not going to tell them what it is yet, right? We're not going to tell them yet exactly what it is, but I will give this teaser. You're going to want to stick around. It's about this amazing piece that was written in like 2002, so it's still fresh and new, and it features gosh, what's the superlative to give this man? I'm not going to tell them who it is yet because that'll give it away. But this man is uber talented, and I can't wait to get to the section to like rave about him. But
Yeah.
before we get to that section, we are going to start with the on the record section because I believe a certain somebody has some knowledge, some facts to bless everyone with. I am ready to hear what you have prepared for us, Miss Sarah.
Yeah. Oh, Damian, thank you. I mean, this on the record section is so exciting, and I'm so glad that you're here for it, so you can fill in some of my gaps about the saxophone. So, just
I'm taking notes.
a quick timeline, quick history. So, the saxophone was originally invented by Belgian designer Adolphe Sax in 1841, and it actually began as a wooden instrument before it became a brass instrument. So I thought that that was just kind of a really interesting aspect as we think of the saxophone today, and just sort of the really full range of sounds that you can get from it. It can be kind of tinny and brassy, or it can be really sonorous and woodsy and very soulful. So it has the mouthpiece of a clarinet, so you still get a little bit of that woodwind sound, but it's sort of more along the lines of a brass instrument. So actually, this instrument was named after its inventor, so Adolphe Sax, right? That's where you get the saxophone part of it from. And he was inventing at the same time as Berlioz was composing, our good friend Hector Berlioz, right? So he showed it to Berlioz, and Berlioz was so excited about the instrument, he published a bunch of articles about how great the saxophone is, about how it's going to be the next big thing in orchestra music and orchestration. And he wrote a piece to feature it. He wrote the Chant Sacre. So I think we can share a little bit of that piece as well, so we can hear just kind of how enthusiastic Berlioz was about this. All right, let's hear it here. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
Yeah, this is such a cool performance. This is a performance actually in France. This is in Toulouse by the Saxbeck Wind Ensemble Sextet.
Oh, wow.
So you can see here, Berlioz just loved this instrument. All right, I'm going to pause us there. It's
Wow.
such a gorgeous piece, right?
I had never heard that before. Like
Really?
that's I didn't even know I needed that. Like I needed that just now. That was I'm like on the list, going immediately following this. I'm going to find and buy that.
Right?
That
Isn't
was
it
awesome.
beautiful? It's really beautiful. And what's so
Yeah.
astonishing is the saxophone has transformed so much from beginning as an orchestral instrument to what we know it as now, this kind of like funky jazz instrument, that we forget its roots. And when you hear it in its original context, as it was meant to be performed, as it for the purpose of its invention, it just totally changes the message of what we think the saxophone is. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Adolphus Sax really intended for it to be an orchestral instrument, but it never really happened because he actually made a few enemies in the orchestra world.
Wait, he is a Berlioz himself?
No, as an Adolphe Sax, the inventor of the instrument.
Oh.
Yeah, he made a few enemies in the orchestral world because he was constantly trying to tinker with these different woodwind instruments. He's like, I can make this sound better. I can do this a little differently. And people started to say, we can't have you in orchestra rehearsal anymore. So the saxophone really never caught on in the orchestral world because of his poor relationships with these different orchestral players.
So Shade has shunned the saxophone.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's amazing.
Has real consequences in the orchestral world.
I guess so. The lesson of the day is be nice to everyone. Your career depends on it. That's so funny.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, so yeah, Damian, I think that as we're learning about the saxophone and just its roots and its originality, I think we can move on to the yet unheard section. This whole show
Oh,
is all about music,
all
and I want to
right.
make sure that we get to the feature piece.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited about the feature piece. But I wanted to add one other thing
Sure.
about the saxophone that I also really love about the instrument. I
Mm,
think well, first it is the bad boy of the woodwind instruments for various reasons, but it seems like it got that, from its start, right? But
mm,
the saxophone is unique to me because of the range of dynamics
mm,
it's able to do. I just really think I mean, the pianissimos that are capable on a saxophone are just different. Like and then of course it plays louder than all the other woodwind instruments. That was also part of its intent, like the intent of its creation, right? Was to have this volume. It's just capable of just being so loud. I remember in marching band, it was
mm.
really like the brass sections and you know the saxophones. Oh, the occasional piccolo because it's so high, but like I just feel like the dynamic range on saxophone is noteworthy and something people should really, give them their credit, give the saxophone its credit for that. But moving on to this amazing piece. So here we are on the yet unheard section, and we are going to talk about a piece called simply a concerto for saxophones. Get into that S. It's a concerto for saxophones, and it was penned by a man named Roberto Sierra. I believe he's of Cuban descent. I believe. I don't want, if somebody's out there, feel free to double check that, but I believe he is. And he wrote this piece for a man named James Carter. James Carter, if you do not know James Carter and you like the saxophone, you need to rectify that as soon as possible. Go out there and bless yourself with James Carter. He is an amazing talent. He actually is from the Detroit area. I believe he was born in Detroit,
Mm.
and then came to New York and just snatched everything and took everything, and like didn't know what to do. He's that kind of a talent. He's played with all kinds of people, recorded with all kinds of people, Cyrus Chestnut, Marsalis, I mean all kinds of people. That it's amazing. So anyway, back to this piece though. So this Roberto fella decided to write this piece that's a concerto for saxophones, because it is written for two saxophones. The same player plays the tenor saxophone and the soprano saxophone, which is, I guess if you have to combine two, those are the two you want to do, right? They're both in the same key. They're both keyed in B flat. Um, and it's interesting because for me, I think it's an interesting story. You can tell me if you think it's interesting or not, or if I have really bad, taste. Maybe I'm a nerd. I might be a music
Oh
nerd.
no, not at all.
But I think it was so interesting that like this immense talent was born in Detroit, ended up via his talent, leaving Detroit and going to New York, which I guess is so many stories of so many performers, becomes this huge recognizable star. He plays all over the place. He plays in Europe. He plays, I mean, he just does all kinds of things. He plays everywhere. And then his hometown symphony, the Detroit Symphony, decides they're going to commission and premiere this piece in 2002. It was written, he wasn't just the first one to play it, it was written for him. So it just makes great use of all of his talents. I'm getting so giddy because they're about to hear it and I've already heard it. So they premiered it in 2002. It went over like gangbusters and people went crazy about it. So crazy that like the forever coveted and forever chased second performance, you know, of a new piece. That's kind of like the goal, right? You get a commission, you do it, and then you're like, will someone do it again? Well, they couldn't wait to do it again. And the very next season, they programmed it again. So we did it again in 2003. Yeah, yeah. And a little birdie told me, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this piece was supposed to be performed last year.
It was.
Where was it? In Boston?
Yeah, March 23rd, 2020 in Boston. They were supposed to premiere Roberto Sierra's work. And as we all are aware, what happened. But thankfully, you're right. I didn't realize that it had been performed by Detroit in its first year and then again.
That repeat performance.
That's remarkable.
And now you're saying we were robbed of a live performance last year because of COVID. Yet one more reason to dislike COVID. Yet one more reason. So yeah, I mean, you're going to hear him. I guess we're going to play it in order. How are we going to serve this to these people?
Yeah, actually, we are going to start with the last movement. We're going to start with movement 4.
Oh, okay.
We're going to start with just the fast movement and just kind of go through it. And we're going to actually hear James Carter on the saxophone. So
nice.
Performing the piece that was written for him by Roberto Sierra.
Nice.
And what I want to say too to our folks who may not be as much of music nerds as Damian and I, I want to explain a little bit about the different ranges of the saxophone. Now, Damian, you had explained, you had said something about dynamics earlier.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about dynamics, we're talking about either how soft or how loud a piece of music is. So that ranges from pianissimo, which is really, really, really soft, to fortissimo, which is really, really, really loud. And then there's a bunch of dynamics and ways that you can phrase these things in between. So with the saxophone, it's kind of different. You've got soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. Now, Damian, you're the vocalist, so I really want you to go through and explain what these words mean.
Absolutely, and I'm going to start from the best to the worst. So, America. Today we begin with the baritone saxophone, more commonly known as the bari sax. It happens to be my favorite for a few reasons. A, that is the first saxophone that ever entered these hands. And that was my intro and first instrument after the bassoon that I learned because I wanted to be in jazz band and there are no bassoons in jazz band. So I was handed the bari sax and I thought it was the most unique sounding thing. So the thing about the bari sax, it is the lowest pitched of the 4 most common saxophones, right? The 4 most common saxophones. There are, as with every instrument, there's like specialty ones and people make individual ones and all this kind of stuff. But for the 4 main saxophones, it's baritone saxophone, which is the lowest pitched one. And then right above that is the tenor saxophone, which is also my second favorite saxophone. You're going to see a pattern going here. The tenor saxophone is really cool, is that it is, as the name implies, it is one kind of family, one pitch range, I guess we can call it, maybe one register. I don't know which word works best, but it's one thing above the bari sax. And it has a very unique sound. The baritone saxophone has a very round, robust sound in the bottom and in the middle. And then like when it gets to the top of the range, because of like the wideness of its construction, it has a very like, I don't know. It can take on like an open quality, or sometimes maybe sound a little throaty in like some places. Like it just has a very unique sound. The tenor saxophone is, again, it's keyed a little higher. And then it has a very, I guess when people think of like I guess the saxophone has been called like a sexy instrument. It seems to double in that area. It's always, playing during those kinds of scenes and stuff. And I guess if one saxophone had to be the sexiest one, it would definitely be the tenor sax, I think, because it has like that mix of like this mellow, dark quality, but it has like, it can still ascend to these high places and give you like these great climactic moments and stuff. It's a pretty cool one. And then above that, we have the just kidding, I love it, but we have the probably the most common, most well-known of all the saxophones in the saxophone family, the alto sax, which is also just kind of, if you generically say saxophone, it kind of generally means the alto saxophone. And it deserves all the accolades it gets. It is the star of the saxophone family. It's, and it deserves it. It's a brilliant instrument. It has amazing versatility. It also has a very unique sound. I mean, it does everything. I love the alto. I'll stop being so shady. I love the alto. And then above that, you have the soprano saxophone. And it, as the name suggests, it is the highest of all of them. And it has a very unique sound. And for me personally, it was the last saxophone that I was introduced to, which is interesting because it had such a huge, what's that fellow's, Kenny G. Kenny G and his efforts, and I guess that was the 90s, made the soprano sax very, very popular. His recordings with the soprano sax made it to the pop charts and whatnot. And it's a great thing. But I'm go back to the Barry sax. If Kenny G did something for the Barry sax, there's another person who just slam dunked the saxophone world. She is hands down the most famous saxophonist ever to come out of the United States. Everyone needs to give it up for Miss V. Lisa Simpson. Lisa Simpson played that baritone sax like nobody's business. She's been playing that baritone sax for like, what, 30 years?
Oh, yeah. She should be the banner.
She's the real deal, right?
I can't believe it. Just totally out of my mind. I forgot about it. How could I?
I love her. Yes, but today, also funny thing about it. So the baritone saxophone and the alto saxophone are keyed in this. They're written in the same key when you write for them. They're both in the key of E flat, an octave apart. And then the other two, the tenor saxophone and soprano saxophone, which we're going to hear today, featured in this concerto, is going to be played by the tenor saxophone and the soprano saxophone, which are both written in B flat. So that's interesting to know, and it's probably not an accident that those were the two that's the saxophone pairing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a feeling.
So I'm very excited just to show our audience some of this concerto, and thank you for explaining just the full range of saxophones. So now we know exactly just kind of what James Carter is dealing with as he's putting himself on stage and performing this piece. So this is a little bit of the fourth movement called Fast of Roberto Sierra's Concerto for Saxophones and Orchestra. I'm gonna stop us there. I could watch that all day. I don't know about you. I
I
could sat
mean,
there all day long.
the audacity, the rudeness. He is amazing. How dare he do that and make it sound so amazing and look so easy? Just some context for people to understand what was happening before their eyes. Yes, it sounded amazing. He was using a bevy of techniques that are just not many people cannot do the things he was just doing in those clips, and you would just have no idea he was using harmonics. He was doing all kinds of crazy things, and it was amazing. Like, I'm hype, as the kids say. That is amazing. I thought, oh my god.
There was a one point where he was making the exact sound of pizzicato or plucking a string instrument on the sax. It was totally wild.
I, I don't have the words, and I also don't have the skill. I wish I could explain how one does that. I never got to that. Like, I have no idea how to do that.
Right. And what I think is so interesting about James Carter that kind of lends to some of his virtuosity is he's not only a virtuoso on the saxophone, he's an expert in vintage saxophones. So it's not just his instrument, he knows about the whole breadth and history of the instruments and how to play and manipulate and maneuver each one, which
That
is wild.
Yeah, it's so funny, right? I guess like that kind of virtuosic talent
Mhm.
paired with that kind of intellectual research and knowledge of the actual physical instrument. I mean, I guess that's what we get. I guess the combination of those two things, we get a James Carter. Hit those books, people. learn about it. Don't just be in that practice room. Hit those books, because I mean, yeah, I can't help but think that his knowledge of the physical instrument like that has got to add to his virtuosity like that. I mean, it's just amazing what he did. It's amazing, and that's just one clip.
I know. That's just
Oh
one
my
little
goodness.
bit of this full performance, this full concerto. And I think what's cool about Roberto Sierra, and just him as a composer, being a Puerto Rican composer who's just done
Oh, is
so
he
much.
Puerto Rican?
He is, yeah, yeah.
Oh, so I misspoke. He's not Cuban.
He's not Cuban. He's Puerto Rican.
See,
I
I would have
got
gotten some messages. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can hear some of these differentiating rhythms and just kind of the way that the orchestration is done is really interesting with this concerto, and it sort of merges his background as a composer with James Carter's background as a saxophonist and this association that the saxophone has with Black music. That
Mm,
it kind of started off as this really French instrument, and now we know it as this we associate the saxophone with blackness in so many ways.
yeah, we really do, and it's and with good reason, right? I mean, it's with good reason. I mean, I know for me, my earliest time hearing of the saxophone, which predated The Simpsons. That Lisa was not the first person I heard playing saxophone. She was the reigning champion baritone saxophone player, but she was not the first saxophonist I ever heard. My very first saxophonist came to me while my mother was playing music while washing the dishes, and it was this man. You may have heard of him, James Brown. He's a little known performer to come out of America, and it was going along, and he was doing what James Brown does like no other, and then like he would stop singing for a while, and then this ball of energy, this like sonorous, like just hit you in the face sound came, and it was a saxophone, and not just a saxophone. It was the saxophone wielded by Maceo. The Maceo. I would later learn this Maceo was not to be messed with. Maceo Parker is bad. He's bad. And so I once I heard him on that one track, I noticed that he was like in a lot of James Brown's work, especially in the 60s. He's just a regular part of the band, it seemed like. And James Brown would even like reference him. And I didn't know Maceo was a person when I first heard him saying it, because James Brown would be like, yo, Maceo. And I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea it was this man's name. You know what I mean? I just had no idea. I thought he was just singing a lyric or something. But yeah, and the Maceo Parker stuck in my head towards like, well, years later, when the same sound, the same person appeared on another musical great who I heard and affected my life a lot, Prince. I listened to a lot of Prince throughout
Yeah.
my life, and I had no idea until maybe I was in high school
Mm-hmm.
that the saxophonist on a lot of his work was in fact the same Maceo that I heard in my childhood. So like music, and not just he, right? It's also it's just kind of been the soundtrack of blackness, especially in the 60s, especially during the political movements. We just heard the saxophone in a lot of things, and like even contemporarily in other genres, not just specifically music. I can recall lots of productions of plays, specifically plays by August Wilson, where there'd be some incidental music in the performance, like between scenes or something like that. Well, literally between scenes, hence the name
Sure.
incidental music. But it would often be the saxophone. And I guess our tradition and participation in jazz and the saxophone's involvement in jazz has been parallel. I don't know. I mean, it's just always been there. What else have you seen it in that just jumps out?
It really started as a jazz instrument.
Mm,
And even going back further than jazz, right?
right.
Sidney Bechet is the one who we credit for just bringing the saxophone over from Europe to America. He went to London on a trip, picked up a soprano saxophone, and the rest is history. Became, one of
Right.
the famous soprano saxophonists in history.
Right.
But the saxophone had kind of this really interesting beginning. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln decided to integrate the military, right?
I know where you're
And
going with
then,
this.
yeah, and then the saxophone became a military instrument because it was so loud. I think it's the barium
Mm,
sax in particular.
mhm,
And they started using it in the military. And who was tasked with learning this new instrument? The newer recruits, right?
mhm.
So you have a literal army of saxophone players,
That's
coming
funny.
out, coming out of the military. And then in about 1900, vaudeville and minstrelsy was really popular, unfortunately, and
Mm,
there were all of these touring groups. And the Six Brown Brothers, I think is what they were called, came out of Canada, and they were a minstrelsy group that went touring around the U.S.
mm,
Uh, and all played saxophones. So it kind of got associated. You have these two different forces. You had the military, and then you had minstrelsy coming together. And then all of a sudden, you had somebody like Sidney Bechet who came in and said, no, let's take this seriously. Let's put this in music. Let's place this in jazz. Let's see what we can do with this. And so Sidney Bechet started playing with Louis Armstrong. And then, you had the Great Migration happening. So you had all of this jazz music that was going on in New Orleans in the South, Satchmo
mm.
and Bechet and Dizzy and everybody. Dizzy played the trumpet, but like you had everybody
Right.
who said, let's go from the South to the North, participate in the Great Migration. Then you had the saxophone all over the country.
Now,
You had a big move of sax.
I have a question. Something about that is really interesting to me. So correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
In this area with the six, were they called the Six Brown Brothers?
Mhm.
Six Brown Brothers. This was minstrelsy,
Yeah.
and they were in fact not brown people, right? They were in blackface. Is
Mhm.
that correct?
Yeah, they were in blackface, yes.
They're in blackface. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but like in that vaudevillian kind of minstrelly sound, the saxophone, it was actually being used to sound like something else though, right? It wasn't actually made because they wanted to sound, wasn't it used to kind of like imitate, or they were trying to invoke like sound of the violin or other strings and other kinds of instruments? That's
Yeah, exactly.
I,
Exactly.
I didn't make that up, right? So the thing I find interesting about those particular brothers and this particular ensemble is you have people pretending to be different kind of people playing
Mhm.
instruments pretending to be a different kind of instrument. That's just kind of funny to me, and I'm sure it's an unintended coincidence, but you know that's interesting.
Right, you're right. Yeah, there
Yeah.
are a lot of levels to that.
Right, there's a lot of levels in that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
to
And
kind of
throughout
how
all of that, the saxophone has still persevered, though. Throughout all of that, it stayed
exactly.
with us.
Exactly. And like you were
Yeah.
saying, I mean, Maceo Parker, which I found out he was actually a part of Parliament Funkadelic, which is one of my favorite bands. Yeah.
Right, you are
So
right.
you have Maceo Parker, you have Dave Newman, who played on Ray Charles's records. David Bowie had saxophone on his records. You have Fela Kuti and the whole Afro beats movement that's rising in Ghana at the same
Fela.
time. Yeah. So I
You
mean,
know what? Did you ever see that show? His show on Broadway?
I have not, no.
Well, it's no longer there, but like years ago, there was a whole
Yeah.
show called Fela about him and his band and his life, and a lot of his music was incorporated in the show. and it did feature some saxophone action.
I've got to check that out.
This little tidbit. I have a few facts myself. How about
Look
that?
at you. Well, Damian, this has been such a joy. But
No.
I think it's about that time. I think we've gotta wrap some things up here. So
All right.
I'll be sure to post all of the links and where to get the music, where to get Roberto Sierra's wonderful concerto for saxophones and orchestra, and how to find out a little bit more about James Carter. We'll post all of that in the chat as well.
Yes, and I would like to take a moment to recognize you. All of the information that you dropped on us and blessed us with in the for the record section was amazing. Particularly that it started as a wooden instrument. I didn't even know that. So thank you so much for your scholarship and the facts and the fun and the laughs and the invitation to be a part of this. I'm so happy to be here, Sarah. Thank you so much. And you're putting up with all of this.
Damian, there is nothing to put up with but good there. Okay, it's a lot of joy. We're just so happy to have you. So happy that you're a new host on the show, and I mean, just looking forward to being with you regularly.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad we got to get it all started with all things saxophone.
Yes,
very fun, a lot of fun.
All right.
So when are we going to do this again? When will the people get to see our offerings again?
Yeah, so we will be back next week around this time next week. So we want to make sure to thank everybody for tuning in. We're going to be exploring activism, history, music, and how all of these things intersect. So be sure to like and subscribe. We would love to see you back here. If you have a comment, if you have thoughts, suggestions, questions, put them in the chat box, put them in the comments below. We read every single one of those comments and would love to hear from you. But in the meantime, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
God bless everyone.